Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work at Milton Academy, an independent boarding and day school outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. This week in the news, college admissions, who knows what? An article by Brennan Barnard of Forbes. A question from a listener comes from Nina. She wants to know, she says, my son has played the trumpet since the 4th grade. And when we started high school, he made the decision he wanted to stay in concert band, which I fully support. Because band meets 4 times a week, it limits his ability to take other courses. For example, our high school offers an engineering certificate if you complete certain courses. Because of his choice to stay in band, he's not able to take many electives and has to choose among those that will fit in with his core classes. Is this something we need to explain to schools? We will also be having a comprehensive conversation about factors to think about if your child is deciding whether or not to apply early decision, also known as ED. And for our interview, we're starting a brand new interview, and it is with Robert Alexander, the Dean of Admission and Financial Aid and Enrollment Management at the University of Rochester. It's a 70-minute interview, and we'll break it up into 2 parts. So we hear part 1 of 2 this week. And Understanding the University of Rochester with Robert Alexander is also our college spotlight. But I'm here with Julia. Hi, Julia.
Hello.
I understand that you had a pretty big trip recently, which I've been excited to hear about. Tell me about it.
Yes, I got to do a brief but thorough Connecticut college tour with 2 of my former colleagues that used to work at Haverford and are also college counselors at independent schools. So we saw Trinity College, Wesleyan University, University of Connecticut, Fairfield University, Connecticut College, and Yale University. Almost forgot Yale. Whoops, that never usually happens.
So, I've asked you to give our admissions tip for the day. So Julia, what did you learn that you didn't know either about a school or the process? Obviously you've been on campuses a lot before, but we always learn something every single time we visit, right? So what were a couple of your takeaways just from visiting, I guess about 6 schools?
Yes. So certainly I am a little more impressed with what families have to go through in scheduling tours. I usually, when I do tour colleges as a college counselor, it's usually part of a counselor program, or it might be a group of other independent schools being hosted at the college. So I've had these sort of specialized tours or information sessions. And now I'm realizing I just went through it as if I were a student. So I registered for that. So kudos to you all for finding the right place to be at the right time, especially at some of these massive universities where you can only park in one parking lot and then go. The counselors I was on tour with, we all went to small liberal arts colleges for our alma mater. So we were like, what is this? So I do think one thing I noticed that was really common with all of these schools is that since COVID, that a lot of the admission officers have remained remote. And then also because it's summer, a lot of construction is happening on campus. So for most of our tours, we were not able to go inside all the buildings. We were not able to meet at a central receiving place like the admission office. Actually, there was very few information sessions being offered. It was just the tours. So something that I learned is that it is still very helpful actually to go on these tours, and that really what you can't glean online is sort of quality of life measures. So even if it was just one student, being able to hear about that person's experiences, about their friends' experiences, what was still super helpful, even if I never saw a dorm room or even if I never saw a lab. And it was still worth my time to visit colleges if you're fortunate enough to be able to do that. And the other thing is that they were pretty good about COVID protocols at all of these places. So I felt very safe the entire time while I was on the tours. It's a little hot, of course, during the summer, but I would say that if you're worried because no one's on campus or there's not an information session, but you still have the ability to visit and now is your best time, I would still suggest you do that. And just a little grain of salt, a lot of construction at places. And, just because the admission officer is not there doesn't mean that you've missed out on a good opportunity to learn about that school.
Well, I had a flashback because, I obviously it's ingrained in my mind, like get there early, follow instructions. But, I was visiting UW-Madison a couple of weeks ago, and I was driving all the way from Minneapolis. So that's a 5-hour drive.
Oof.
So, and my tour was at 10:30. And so I left like super early and everything, just because it's a long drive and I'm going to be late. And so now there was a little bit of a mix up because I didn't get a confirmation email like you normally get. Normally the confirmation email has all these details, right?
Right.
So I just said, okay, well, I'll go to the Office of Admission. So at first I get to the Office of Admission and there's no parking around UW-Madison. So you have to like go into like one of those big parking garages and do all that, which, takes just a little bit of time. And then I walk all the way down. I walk in and they say, oh, the tours don't leave from here. They leave from like the student union, which was like, it was like I'm super speed walking and it was probably 15 minutes.
Yep. That exactly happened to us at University of Connecticut. I can now tell you, I didn't need to go on the tour. I've been all around that campus in all the wrong buildings looking for the tour.
Well, I did 19,000 steps that day, so I think the same. So awesome. All right. Well, Julia, you gave us a great admissions tip last month when you were on, and I'm loving this idea of using our new members of our team to share some insights. And so you're going to give us a tip today. What do you got?
Sure. So we thought we would chat about the honors section of your Common App. So in your Common App section, there is an education part of your general sort of Common App. And under education, when you click that tab, you'll see there's a section after current or most recent year courses. There's a section on honors. And this is a great thing for me to talk about because I actually have this conversation with my students a lot. My school does not give many awards. So some of your high school might have like National Honor Society, or they might have book awards, or they might have awards for science excellence. We don't really have that many at my high school. And so my students get really nervous when they don't have anything to report in the honor section. And I want you all to know that's okay. It really is your place to sort of talk about maybe some things that you've been recognized for with maybe nationally, maybe within your school, maybe within your community. Let me know if you disagree, Mark, but my rule of thumb is that if you think it might be an honors, the wording is, do you wish to report any honors related to your academic achievements, beginning with the 9th grade or international equivalent? If you think it might be an honors award related to your academic achievements, I would put it in. No one's going to fault you for maybe if it wasn't the perfect thing to put down there, maybe if it wasn't, didn't fit neatly. It's important here to think about what academic achievements mean too. I argue that my students who might submit to the Scholastic Awards, or maybe you've won something for your creative writing, artwork, music, those I would argue you should include, even if they don't feel like, traditional core academic subjects. And so there might be, you're allowed to put in the title, right? And then you can say which grade you received this. And sometimes if you receive it over the summer, it's a little wonky, but please know that admission officers are really not paying attention to that section. They're just sort of curious what you might have been recognized for. And then you can talk about if you got that through your school, if you got that regionally or through your state. I'm thinking about, debates as well. Sometimes that can happen at the national, regional level, and then also international awards. So if you think it might fit in there, I would put it in. And if you have access to a high school counselor who's able to chat with you about this, always run that by them. But better to brag if you can and include that if you can than not include that. It just gives you a little more rounding out and gives the reader an idea of what you might have applied for, been up for, recognized for. And again, if you don't have anything to report or anything that feels fancy to you, you're not going to be at a disadvantage because you don't have some of these awards that maybe some other students might have gotten in recognition for their academic achievement.
Well, thanks for sharing that, because I know that is definitely a source of stress. Every year I get, I don't know how many, at least a half a dozen people that are concerned that they don't feel they have either any or a distinguished list. And they really act like my application's immediately going into the denial pile because of this. It's really a source of stress. And so it was really good for you to, I think, reduce a little stress there in the way you explained that. Now, for admissions vernacular, this is one I could have absolutely had you talk about as well. FGLI. I know that's a term that you probably, was that bandied around? Julia used to do multicultural recruitment. Was that term used at all? But then,
not when I left admissions to do my other job, it was not a term that was around yet. So this is when I came back to admissions about 7 years ago. This was a term I had to refamiliarize myself with.
And I'm glad you shared that, because like these terms, they come and go and new ones come all the time, so keeping up with them will drive you crazy. But it's controversial because it stands for first gen low income.
Mm-hmm.
And the one reason it's partly controversial is because a lot of people that are first gen, sometimes they're offended that they're grouped in with low income, and people that are low income sometimes are offended that it's assumed that they're first gen. Right. So have you heard some of those conversations where
Yes. Yeah. It's funny. So
talk about how those go.
Exactly. Yeah. So it is not perfect by any means. And at the same time, I do feel, especially with my students, they are appreciative of a recognition, though, of a group that has been somewhat invisible in a lot of these diversity, equity, access conversations. So it's a double-edged sword, I guess. There's a lot of progress that comes with that, and then it's not a perfect categorization either.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because even though it's controversial, it's mostly people are going to be appreciative if it's being used in the context of we need more FGLI kids.
Right.
If it's that, or we need to make sure we're supporting our FGLI kids. Like that's oftentimes how you'll hear it brought up. And so I'm glad that Julia brought that point of there's appreciation for the recognition and the acknowledgement and not feeling invisible and feeling seen. And let's be honest, a lot of times there's overlap. A lot of times first gen is low income, or yep, low income is first gen. But I think people could also understand how they, you could also be one and not the other. But FGLI is our admissions vernacular for the day. Okay, and for our big number, now this is interesting. I like to do this sometimes. I like to pull a big number that's going to be in our article and then use it as a segue into our article. So our big number is 1,400. Well, what does 1,400 refer to? Well, we're going to talk about data in our article. And here's a quote from the article, Brian Zucker at Human Capital Research Corp, HCRC. He explains that in their enrollment management consulting, and this is one of these companies, by the way, that a lot of admission offices use. They hire them. They're one of the big competitors, one of the big four out there with Capture Higher Ed, EAB, and Noah Levitz. So one of the big boys on the block. There's a lot of small guys, but they're one of the big ones. So here's what he says. His company curates thousands of data points on individual student characteristics. Drawing from multiple sources, their researchers and analysts distill the data down to about 1,400 variables with which they base their predictive modeling. So we've talked a lot in the past about engagement scoring and predictive modeling being used at some places to figure out which of these students is actually serious about me. Because we've said on many occasions, the goal, a lot of times the perspective of an applicant, your goal is to get in, and you think that their goal is to recognize the people that meet a proverbial admission standard, but a lot of times their goal is enrollment. They're thinking about building their class. And so it's not always perfectly aligned. And so this is one of the things that goes on behind the scenes. And I think that's a good segue to our article. Anything you want to say on that, Julia?
No, go keep going.
Right.
But I definitely have a lot of thoughts on this, especially after doing all of those tours in Connecticut and hearing different explanations of how a college might use data in their process.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
So this is an article Brennan has done, and our regular listeners probably know who Brennan Barnard is. If you're a first-timer, he wears a number of hats, and one thing that he has in common is that he was, when Susan Tree was the director of college counseling at Westtown, he was young out of college, Franklin and Marshall. He was an associate director, and I was in an admissions office at that time, and I was just starting to dabble in college counseling with Susan. But all three of us worked together back from 2001 to 2004. But since then, I mean, Brennan has gone on to, you look at his resume and you look at what he does at the same time, and you'll get a migraine because he's really wearing a lot of hats.
Yeah.
He really is. I mean, he's been at the Dairyfield School in New Hampshire for 14 years and a director of the Khan Lab School, which is Khan Academy's created a Khan Lab School. So he works with that. He's been very involved in Harvard University's Graduate School of Education, and he's been a college admissions program manager there. He's been involved in Making Caring Common project. He's also involved in U.S. Performance Academy, which is it's athletes, and he's been the director of college counseling for them and helping them in the college admission process. And he's found time to author a few books with Rick Clark at Georgia Tech. So that's Brennan. Oh, not to mention that he's a writer. He writes for Forbes. He writes for Washington Post. He's written for Huffington Post in the past. He's a prolific writer who writes great stuff on college admission. So Brennan did a 3-part series on data and how important data is for both sides, both the college and for applicants. And this is the first of 3, and we are privileged that Julia is going to discuss part 2 next month, and then the third part the final month, because all 3 articles were absolutely fantastic. So in this particular article, it starts out with a quote that I want to read. It says, "The data dance in college admissions is a delicate one, and it's not always clear who's leading. Students and those who support them are trying to assess their likelihood of being admitted. Colleges and universities are seeking to craft a diverse class of students, and they're trying to anticipate the behavior and the choices of adolescents." And it goes on to talk about, here's another thing it says I like, "There's an ongoing transparency tension about what kind of information gets shared, how much, and with whom." And then the article looks at, well, what is it that colleges know? There's the quote that I read, earlier from Brian Zucker, at Human Capital Research Corp, which I won't read again. But it talks about Slate, which we've talked about a lot before, the CRM that colleges use to gather voluminous amounts of information, and then they feed this into third parties like Human Capital. And they also draw from all kinds of websites that kids go on, like Raise Me and CapEx and Niche and many others. And they have access to everything from which web pages on the website students have been surfing to craft out models. The article goes on to talk about how they'll generate, talking about human resource capital here, as much as 24 different enrollment models, including composite yield estimates based on student engagement and background at specific moments in the admission cycle. And they particularly look at the previous 20 days. What have the interactions been? And as they build out predictive models to help coach schools on whether or not they'll yield a student. Now, once again, not everybody is doing all of this, but more people are doing it than you think. And then it says, if all this sounds really wonky, this is just an example of how much data colleges have at their disposal. Then it turns around and says, well, what about you? What data do you have? Because you have more data than you've ever had before. And it highlights several sources that we've all had on as recommended resources before, but I'll just mention the ones it lists. It talks about the college scorecard, which is fantastic. The Department of Education's college scorecard. It talks about their searchable database. Zucker in particular thinks families should pay attention to the debt data. And I almost threw this out for the admissions vernacular, Julia. He uses the term loan repayment rate, which I actually love. It's the percentage of the original loan balance that is still there 5, 10, and 20 years later. So you take out a loan. Let's say you take out a loan for $30,000 to go to college. What percentage of that is still left to be paid 5, 10, and 20 years later? And so he says that's one thing people should look at. You should look at statistics for Parent Plus loans, which we're not big fans of here. And he says it's staggering how many schools show a remaining loan balance in excess of 50 or 60 cents on the dollar 20 years after the student's finished. So he encourages people to use College Scorecard to look at that data. There's other things they mention in the article. I strongly encourage you to read this article. We'll put the link in the show notes. Other ways you can use College Scorecard. One of the things that I love is how College Scorecard now allows you to look at program level data based on fields of study. So this is a new thing. So in other words, if you want to look at how much do biomedical engineers make coming out of college from Duke, and you want to compare that to like Northeastern or something, you can look at that, and you can look at it like first year out, mid-career, that kind of thing. So they never used to have it by fields of study. They just used to have it by college, but that was always so skewed toward like the engineering and the tech schools, which have higher income. So now they have it by field of study. And then it says common data set, which Susan talked about that a lot 2 weeks ago, so I'm not going to go into that. As a great source, it talks about college results online, which we've had as a recommended resource before. It's great for tracking graduation rates and by different demographics and see how well students are supporting under-resourced kids. And then another resource which we've recommended is also recommended here, the campus safety and security data, and that the U.S. Department of Education produces. So if you want to know anything from car thefts to sexual assault, all that. And then also the National Student Clearinghouse. So those are some of the resources. It says students can go on offense and learn about school, so it's not just completely one way. So that's in essence the article. Julia, what do you want to say? Where do you want to take it?
I thought this article was very helpful coming on the heels of you talking about the US news rankings and how data is actually really an important part of the picture. And clean data is the best to be using here. And I love all these suggestions in the article because it does sort of return the power back to prospective students. I would say that actually it's really interesting working with this generation of students because these are data savvy, very good at researching on the internet, very good. Actually, a lot of my students are really adept at coding and understanding also statistical analyses. So they're very wary of how data might show up in all the right ways. So when they come into my office and they're like, Ms. Esquivel, this random college keeps sending me information, or I keep getting this, and they're starting to get a little nervous by the amount of people, this big brother effect that is sort of mentioned in the article. They start to get nervous about it. And I let them know they can turn it right back around on those colleges and figure out, what's the real information here. And actually, sometimes it really helps them if a college really is sensitive to those sort of enrollment points and maybe do use those 1,400 variables to determine. It's making students dig a little deeper and realize and try to figure out like, oh, like what are the values of this college? How does this actually show up in student life? And finding that data that might tell you about the demographics of the student or your return on your investment, which we talk about a lot, actually puts a lot of power back into your hands to you, so you can discern with the more clean data sort of what you're looking at.
Yeah, and I think that when you have this conversation, people can get really queasy. I was having a conversation with one of your really good friends. This is some time ago. When it was one of the people you went with on your trip, and it was some time ago, and she was just saying to me how, and this was when she was still in the admission office, how wow, it's kind of scary, like how much access we have just through Slate. Just click a button, and it's kind of big brothery, like So she's a little conflicted with it, but one thing that I will share is it's not all only about likely to enroll. A lot of times schools are really using it to discern who's a match. And I'll give an example of an actual conversation I had with a college admission officer in the last month. So I was having a conversation with this admission officer about this same thing and how data is used in the process. And they shared something with me. They said, one of the things the school is really taking really serious is anti-racism initiatives. And they were trying to discern whether to admit a student and who was on the fence. It could have kind of gone either way. And they could tell by her web surfing that she had spent a lot of time looking on their website at their anti-racist initiatives. Yep. And everybody in the committee thought this is fantastic. She has the values and the perspective that we're looking for, and it got her in. And so obviously she wouldn't have gotten in if she didn't have a competitive transcript, and the other pieces of the application obviously had to be there. But the point is, a lot of times this stuff is used to see if there's affinity with the school's values, mission, philosophy, and because nobody has any interest in bringing in, I don't care how great the kid is, if they're going to be discontent and if what you offer is not what they're looking for. Anything else you want to say about that, Julia?
Absolutely. And actually, I was talking with, again, one of my, I think a different person on my trip, and it was a school that does not, and they were very clear, they do not measure demonstrated interest or demonstrated engagement, and then talked a lot about the fit of the student. And so we were like, well, then how do you measure fit? And this school has no supplements either. So you just turn in your Common App and that's sort of the end of it. And so we were thinking it's possible. I don't know about this school in particular, sure, but like, are they using, not in a demonstrated interest or demonstrated engagement way, but how are they sort of using the data to maybe determine fit that could be potentially like, maybe an interview was offered, but there's no supplements. Are they mining that interview for the data? And also,
this particular school is doing kind of all the things, right? Like those supplements. Those supplements are extremely important,
right?
And whether you're showing up online and being engaged and all those things are important. And
yes,
if you interview, I mean, so it's usually a multi-pronged approach, but I just want to emphasize it's not only about LTE, likely to enroll, it's also about fit and match. And that's a huge, and I think that helps people understand it a little bit more sometimes and not just disparage it completely.
Yes. I've seen it with majors as well. So at larger universities, I will tell, if it's a school that I know does this, I will say, you asked to be considered as a chemistry major. Please spend 10 to 20 minutes on their chemistry department website. Access that through the link that you'll get as an email from that college. And I have less conversations with those colleges about the students' interest in actually being part of. And no, of course, a lot of students, they're 17, they might not know what they want to study. But at schools that actually mine data like this, it goes a long way to show you've actually thought about this major and you show an interest in it. And I have seen that be helpful in the eventual enrollment of the student if they had spent a little time on a certain department's website to match their major interests.
Well, we got a couple of tips out of you. I hope everybody heard that, because that's actually a really important tip, is spending time on the department's website. It can really help a lot with college-specific essays too, because one of the common ones is not just why us, but why this major.
Yes.
That's a really common one out there. Why this major? And going to the department website is one of the great places to get great information. And we probably haven't talked about that enough on this pod. The last time that came up was when Eric Furta was interviewed, formerly at University of Pennsylvania. He really emphasized the department website a lot in his interview. But that was getting close to 2 years ago, and I think we haven't brought it up since then. And so, you get new listeners all the time, and even people listen all the time. We need to be have reinforcement and have things said in different ways. So I'm really glad you brought that up, Julia.
Absolutely. That is actually a large conversation I have with my students who, when it comes to what do you want to study and why here, guess what? Everyone says, great professors, you have a department for it. I like these classes. But there's actually, the department spend a lot of time on those websites, and there's very nuanced information about how engineering might be at Penn, for example, and how it's articulated at Union College, right? So just because they both offer engineering doesn't mean that the departments are actually going to sync up with what you're looking for. And that will become very obvious when you write that supplement.
You know what? I want to follow up with you on that, because you, of course, you're a reader for Emory not too long ago, and wasn't that long ago you were in admissions at Haverford. How often, for the supplemental question, did you find that you got just basic stuff and repetitive stuff, like classes are small, there's a strong sense of community, your biology department is good, like that level? How frequent was that?
That almost all the time. And I still see that as a counselor, actually.
Yeah.
So we always say, rule of thumb, if I could put another school's name in there and then read it to like a lay person, maybe not me or something else. And if it all sort of makes sense, then you've not done a good job. Like, you're not wrong in what you've said, but and I know we've said it a lot of time on this podcast, but often if you've got to the point where they're reading your supplements and they're considering you for admission, it is often the supplements that are the deciding factor for students. So that, not to say that, like, if you write the best supplement ever, you'll get in, you're up to get to that point where you're admissible. But then, if you've got a really good supplement that's thoughtful, that shows your actual research and connection to the college, and you might not say anything unique. I think Columbia comes to mind for me. They have a question about, or even Brown does this in some way. What do you want to study, and how will that be articulated through our curriculum? So what you want to study might be broad and general and applicable in a lot of supplements, but you're going to study that very differently at those two schools, and therefore understanding the actual department, curricular structure, how that supports your academic interests. That's really important, because if they've got a really strong student that is able to articulate how Columbia uniquely sets them up academically compared to another very selective, wonderful school, then that might be the tip from a waitlist to admit. And if you do it the other way, it might be a waitlist to deny, or admit to waitlist. So I would say the majority are not bad supplements, but the majority do not make a compelling case for why you're a unique fit for that college, and that college is a unique fit for you.
Yeah, and it's because of that, and I was really happy to see Julia's answer. We didn't rehearse this before. I just asked her, but I kind of knew what she was going to say. But I get excited about them because they represent an opportunity. Because so few people get granular enough, then you have the opportunity to really pop.
Yes.
And remember, these are humans that are reading, so it's human nature to get bored if it's like the same thing I've read 15 times today.
Yep.
You want to comment on that, Julia?
Yes, all admission offices have shorthand for the standard questions that they get or the answers that they get. So I'll use Haverford asks about the honor code, and it explains some of the central tenets. And the majority of students will just sort of book report, repeat those back, and we would just write TRC, trust, respect, concern, which meant that yep, they answered the supplement, but I don't have anything rather exciting to tell you about in that answer. So, yep.
Yeah. Good stuff. Awesome. Well, I look forward to coming back in a month and taking up part 2 because Brennan really, really got to some good stuff. He really delved. I mean, this was, it's funny. I heard him talk. It wasn't to me, but I heard him talk about this series, and his intention was not to do a trilogy. His intention was to just do one article, but then he got in and he was just overwhelmed by how much he had to share, and he turned it into a trilogy. And every one is really good. In fact, I was just reading the third one again before we came on today because I was thinking, do we do 2 of the 3? But I think all 3 are so good that they're worth us spending some time and attention. So thank you, Julia. We'll see you next month.
Sure. Thank you.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Lisa, I absolutely love your interview with Marshall Gentry. So tell me about how that came about? Like, how did you find such a great guy like that?
It was totally by accident and the easiest thing ever. So Mr. Gentry works at Durham Academy where my kids are going to be going to school this fall. And they had a new student meet and greet. And so Alan actually struck up a conversation, Alan, my husband, with him. And just when he was talking about his background and then this presentation that he'd given, Alan started talking to him about his background and this presentation he'd given to Durham Academy students on getting ready for college, the students and their families, and how well received it was. And Alan was just kind of like, come here. You got to talk.
Yeah, good old Alan.
Yeah. He's like,
Alan
this
comes through big time.
For their podcast. And so he agreed right away. And it just was, he's just a lovely person to get to know and talk to, in addition to how much knowledge he has. He's like done it all in life. He's like, writes books, plays music,
Yeah, like you call him a Renaissance man, but he's just, every one of his points has so much depth and substance.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, we've never quite had an interview like that, like that addresses success in college with that level of depth and sort of the places where the train gets off the track. So, I'm talking out loud here, but I'd love it like next June or something like that to see if we could have him do a Q&A. And like, remember how you attended the sessions I did with Lisa Prescott from UCSB and Gil Villanueva from Richmond and Sam Prouty from Middlebury, like where they come on and they do Q&A, because I think we could promote it all year. We could get a good sign up. I think we'd get a really good attendance and just let people pick his brain because he's got so much wisdom in there.
Oh, I know. So many different years of experience at different settings. Well, he's a very nice person on top of it. So I'm sure I could strong arm him into it. It's just a little bit of emotional pressure. So
Well, if you give him a heads up of June, then it feels like, it's like 10 months from now. Sure. The calendar is not full then.
Yeah.
And then we can recruit all year for it. And so, awesome. Well, you are on fire. Between Christina Boyd-Smith. Feedback from that was amazing. Anyone who needs an executive coach, I think they know where to go.
Oh, yeah. I feel like I need to hire her, especially today. But, she's great.
Yeah.
She's just a really wonderful person on top of all of that. So, yeah, the fun thing about these interviews for me is I got to spend time with, and also with Nick Gozick, who is the director of global education at Elon. I mean, I've gotten to spend time with such amazing people that I wouldn't have gotten to chat with that much otherwise. So
you just dropped the name on people. So what you don't realize is Lisa's got a trilogy. She's got one more here. It's coming up on Study Abroad. That'll be a little bit later in the summer.
Right. Yes.
But I personally appreciate it. It takes a lot of pressure off me to find all these interviews. And for the longest time, I've wanted us to have more content on success in college.
Right.
It's not just about getting in, but it's kind of like,
yeah.
what do I say? I say it's not where you go, it's what you do when you get there, and what you do when you get out of there. And so we need to back that up by having content that's help you when you get there. And so
exactly,
I think it's really a nice compliment to all of these admissions ones. So I just want to thank you personally. And,
well, thank you for giving me the opportunity, because it's not something, I ever thought I would be interviewing people for a podcast. It's sort of like, all right, well, I guess I'm doing this now. But it's great. I love it. That's where life's unpredictability is paying off. So.
And the fun thing is the content is evergreen. So like, who knows how many people like find that, end up listening to it, and, down the road, who would help. So it's all about helping each other out here. So we're all about that. Awesome. All right. Well, why don't you take our question today from Nina?
All right. So again, this question is from Nina, and Nina writes, my son has played the trumpet since the 4th grade. And when we started high school, he made the decision that he wanted to stay in concert band, which I fully support. Because band meets 4 times a week, it limits his ability to take other courses. For example, our high school offers an engineering certificate if you complete certain courses, but because of his choice to stay in band, he's not able to take many electives and has to choose among those that will fit in with his other core classes. Is this something that we need to explain to schools?
So a couple of things caught my attention about this, and everybody hates this, but there's always going to be it depends in here. There's a lot of variables that we don't know, and so I'll be using a few of those. But so one of the things she says is it limits his ability to take other electives. And colleges are first and foremost looking at your core classes, your academic GPA, math, English, science, social studies, foreign language. So I didn't get the sense from her that he was not taking, rigor in those 5 cores, because she said it limits his ability to take other electives. And so that's a big factor. If she would have said it, he's not going to do that much math or English or history or science or foreign language because he's doing all this, I would be concerned. If he wasn't pursuing music, obviously if he's pursuing music, that's different. So that's the first thing that caught my attention, was she specifically talked about electives. And then, some of it, of course, is going to depend on the selectivity of the school that he applies to. I don't know what his major will end up being. Whatever your major is that you declare, if it's a school that admits by major or admits by college, then they are definitely going to be looking to see that you have demonstrated a track record of excellence and rigor in that particular area. And so, she mentioned specifically engineering certificate there. So I don't know if that's an area that he's interested in, engineering or not. Certainly the selective the school will factor in, whether school admits by major, by college, what major he's interested in, and what his resume looks like in light of his intended area of study. All those things will be factors. I would also say, though, that to get to the nub of her question is I would explain it. I would explain it. I absolutely would. I'd use the additional information to explain it. And the reason for that is there can be a different, let's say there's some question in the mind of an admission officer as to why somebody didn't take some courses.
Mm-hmm.
The perception can be different if you didn't take them because you were taking something else that didn't allow to take them, versus if I don't know that, I might just think you chickened out, or I might just think, and that's different. That's a different perception, right? Like he didn't take it because, there's a student I'm working with right now in North Carolina who, so many serious acting courses that he has to take, that it's prohibiting him from taking other courses because, performing arts school. And so that's a different perception. So there's a lot of variables and there's some things we don't know here, but the things that I would highlight, I would say, yes, you should inform. 2, electives versus core classes is a big difference. 3, the selectivity of the school is going to matter. And 4, how the school admits is going to matter. Any other thoughts that you have, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really timely question. I just got asked this question this morning in a slightly different context by one of my students. And his struggle has been that, he's taken a zillion AP courses up till now. And he's in his senior year, but, he's feeling some pressure to take, I think it's AP Lit, or it's AP Lit, right? The senior year AP.
Usually people do Lang in 11th and Lit in 12th.
Yeah,
Usually, yeah.
right.
Mhm.
So, but he really wants to take debate and speech, and he also wants to take a legal writing class because he thinks he might want to be an attorney. And so, I think he's gone with the idea that he's going to pursue his interests, but we're going to explain that the reason he didn't take that one AP is because these were something that were very interesting to him, and he, the school doesn't offer it in that kind of honors or AP format. So hopefully that'll be okay, because it's hard. I mean, I would love for kids to be able to follow their passions. You
Well,
can't do all the things.
schools do like you to take what you love. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they do. They like to see that. They also kind of like you to not necessarily rotely feel like you need to just follow like an automaton this scripted program, right? They like to see some of that, showing some individuality there. On the other hand, there has to be a certain level of rigor has to clear a
Right,
threshold to convince them that one, you can do their program, and two, that you didn't take the lazy way out.
right, right.
So as long as you sort of reach that threshold, I think people are surprised how much schools love to see that a kid decided to chart his own course and pursue something that they loved and didn't just do the conventional thing. And
Well, that'll reassure him.
yeah, and that's why it's good to get the explanation in.
Hmm. Yeah, and like this student, I think has like going to have like 11 APs or something, and so
Right.
far he's gotten all fives on all the ones he's taken. So it's not that's not really a question, but I think this is a great question from Nina, because I know that a lot of people struggle with this,
Yeah.
and trying to plan
By the
their
way, if you're listening
schedules.
out there, don't be intimidated. Not everybody gets 11 fives
No,
on
he's
everything they
an
take.
exceptional
Yeah.
student, but yeah, I mean, but that's not normal. So,
Yeah. I mean, every year I have about 3 kids like that, but that's not normal,
right, right,
That's putting you in the top 2%. I mean, 100 for 500 kids, if that, even that does that
right,
well.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Lisa, I wanted to also go back. We talked about early decision a little bit last week, and
Sure.
I wanted to talk about that in general just a bit more, because I know that's timely for people as well, right? Like, we took on the question last week. I need to know what my ED is. But I just want to, I always say when it comes to ED or not to ED, it's one of the most complex counseling situations that I work with families on. And I wanted to just kind of talk about that a little bit, just because a lot of people are processing that, like when to ED, when to not ED, because it's personal, but it's complicated, And so, well, let me ask you. I'll just throw it out to you. When would you say would be a good time for somebody to ED versus not to ED? And we didn't talk, listeners, we never talked about this before, so this is just a complete on the
It's an
spot
impromptu
conversation.
quiz.
Yes.
Ugh.
Don't put it that way. Impromptu question, not quiz.
Just kidding. I think that if it's a student's like very vetted first choice school, it is they visited, they maybe taken a class online through like a virtual admissions experience, they have thoroughly talked with their parents about it, and they know that like they can afford it, be like with what the net price calculator says, or if they're full pay, that this is all right. And I think where it's really going to give you a huge bump in your admissibility. So in those cases, I would feel like that would probably be a good use of an early decision to try to increase your chances of getting into your definitely first choice school.
You hit on a lot of the key points there. Like, sometimes I'll have someone that wants to ED to a place where they're highly likely to get in anyway. And I usually dissuade them from that, because I've
Right.
just seen so many times when people change their mind over 6 months. And I'm saying 6 months because that's the time between November 1st and May 1st. And so if it's not going to give you an admissions advantage, I'm not necessarily a fan of doing it, just because I've seen so many times, like I said, where people learn to like another school or they get to know schools more. On the other hand, I think sometimes people think, your ED has to be this place that just absolutely blows you away, like you found heaven on earth. And I think that's a little oversold too. And I think I get a little worried when people think that way, because the people that think that way are the people I find that are disappointed with their college, because it's just that no school is going to be perfect. And I it just isn't. And that's why I always say to people, I bet there's some things you don't like about your high school. And they're like, let me tell you about it. Right. I said, well, guess what? Your college is going to be the same way.
Absolutely.
And so I get a little worried if people are expecting just nirvana on earth or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important that there's been enough familiarity and exposure so that you say, you know what, this is a place where I can be content. I've kicked the tires enough. I've done an MRI in the place. I can be content. It's always tricky because people get into the tactical strategy of admissions of ED. I do believe that it should be a realistic option. That's the other thing. It shouldn't be just a complete long shot. I get other people that want to take a shot at something that's completely out of range. That doesn't make a lot of sense either.
No.
It's complicated because I personally am a believer in an ideal world that if you're going to ED, you should have visited the school and hopefully thoroughly visited it. But at the same time, look at the Questbridge program, the Questbridge match. That's 12. For those of you who don't know, Questbridge is the nation's largest program for placing gifted and talented, under-resourced students, race-blind program in, now it's almost 50. They keep adding new partner schools, almost 50 of the leading institutions in this country. And they have a match set up where similar almost like to medical admissions, but, you can pick up to 12 schools. And if any of the 12 pick you, you're going there. Well, you know what? Most of those students have not had a chance to visit all those schools. They just haven't. These are under-resourced families. The getting to 12 schools is very expensive. So, I never say never in terms of not having visited, because I've worked with many Questbridge students that have matched. They're super glad that they matched, and they love their school or they learn to love it or make the most out of it. But in an ideal sense, it would definitely be good to have really gotten to know the school. And then the financial part is really important. And here's where the financial part gets tricky. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this, because there's a lot of nuance. So let's say you found a school, you really like it, and let's say you don't qualify for financial aid. And let's say it's one of these 80,000 plus schools, which, by the way, that list is getting to be quite long. It's not just where there's like one or two of these 80,000 plus schools now. There's probably 40 of them, maybe more. There's a lot of them. So there's a number of questions that people also have to ask in that case. One of them is, do you love the school so much more than some of your high probables that might cost you half that amount? And are your finances such where you can justify what's really more than $200,000 decision? You say, well, how do you come up with that? Well, let's just say 80,000, even that I'm seeing so many 86, 84, 83, 85, and that's your first year. By fourth year, there's going to be 95 to 100, but let's just use a simple number, 80 for now. So if it's an 80,000 option versus a 40,000 option, so right away there's $40,000 saved, right? Times that by 4, that's 160, but that's after tax money. So you have to say, okay, that's maybe $220,000 in real earned money. And so is it important enough to you to pay that extra $220,000 to go to the school you like the most versus another school that you maybe are highly likely to get in, but you may also really like a lot? And this is where people come down really differently. I'll work with families like this, and they'll say, no, it's not worth that to me. And especially ones that want to go on for professional school. They'll say, you know what? We're still looking at law school, business school, med school. We've got 3 kids. We've got 4 kids. We've got 2 kids. And that $220,000 is significant.
Absolutely.
And I can't tell people what to do here because they know how deep their pockets are. And so this is where their sense of where the finances, how big of a role the finances play, has to come in. And I have to take my cues from them. But it's really important. And I'll have people make different decisions. And then I have another family who they're not just quite comfortable committing just yet. Like they like the idea of having that extra 6 months. Maybe they've even visited all their schools, but maybe they didn't get to go to some when school was in session. And I always say to them, well, take a look at your probables.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you're comfortable knowing that, your reach, stretch, challenge schools and your possibles, they may all pass on you because RD is a bloodbath. Do you like your probables enough that if you end up going to hopefully they have 3 of them. I usually recommend they have 3. It varies from person to person. And if I have someone that says, yeah, I like all of those schools, then that's oftentimes a good candidate to not ED, especially if, like from a financial standpoint, like I said, that could be a $220,000 decision.
Absolutely.
And then especially if they're looking at advanced degrees, multiple kids, then there's another family. Money's just not an issue. They have the money sitting there in the account. They have $300,000 sitting in the 529, or grandparents are involved, and they make an entirely different decision. And so, but these are all some of the nuances that people need to think through. Part of it is, do you like your top school enough to justify that additional cost, especially if some of the other schools are going to be at a distinctly different price point? Does that make sense, Lisa?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think so. And at the end of the day, it's just like a really personal choice to decide this. I mean, Lily just wouldn't ED anywhere. She said, I'm not giving them my power. No, I'm going to wait and see and let them have all the offers on the table, and then I'm going to choose. I'm not going to cut this off. So, but that was just her personality, right? Some people don't feel lucky and they want to have it all tied down right away. So it's just a really interesting
just to show
decision.
Your point, like I have 2 kids and one ED'd and one didn't.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like that's just how personal it is. I'm definitely not anti-ED. In fact, if I'm working with a family and like going to their most competitive school is very high on their priority list, then I'm going to show them those ED admit rates versus those RD admit rates.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to let them know that at the most competitive schools, kids with ridiculous transcripts and high testing, they get passed over all the time. I mean, probably one of the best stats, came from Jonathan Burdick at Cornell. Was one of our big numbers about 4 or 5 months ago. 89% of Cornell students with perfect test scores didn't get in last year. 89%. So, perfect test scores, great. You got a 1 in 10 chance. And guess what? That's the least competitive of the Ivy League schools statistically.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not necessarily true for all their programs. Some of their programs are super competitive. But overall, when you look at the numbers, it's the biggest Ivy, and it has usually the highest admit rate. And that's the school with the highest admit rate, and still 9 in 10. So think about what's happening at the Stanfords and the Harvards and the Yales and the Princetons and the MITs, and Carnegie Mellon and computer science and some of these other schools, right? So that's a factor. Like for some people, it's like, I want to go to the most competitive school. We've put the money aside. Money's not a factor here. That's a perfect candidate for ED. And then another perfect candidate for ED, and this is so weird because it goes against what people would think. It's all the way on the other side of the financial spectrum.
Right.
It's the person for whom they need a large aid award. And the schools that are able to give the largest aid awards are oftentimes the most competitive ones to get in.
Right.
And oftentimes those are schools that ED is your best chance. And sometimes it's not even the most competitive. I was having a conversation with an admission officer from Gettysburg. Gettysburg's a competitive school, but wouldn't be in that most competitive bucket. And we were actually having this conversation. And she was saying, I just wish more of our high need families would apply ED, because that's when we have the money to give a large aid award.
Right.
And, we're just not going to have the money in the regular decision round. Now, the hard thing is some of those families, they're some of the ones that are the most intimidated by that price. So you really need to work with them to bring them around and nurture them. So in general, this is an oversimplification, but in general, ED is best for both sides of the financial spectrum.
Right. It's the folks in the middle that really need to think it through.
Yes. It's the folks in the middle and not the middle of the national numbers, right? Because national numbers indicate middle income's like 66,000 for a family of 4. But that's not necessarily the middle of the applicant pool for these schools where it may be 1 to 300 or something, you're looking at the middle. So I'm talking more of that middle, not national averages middles.
Right.
And those are, and one of the reasons why it's so challenging is because, for those of you who don't know this, if you haven't run EFC numbers and calculations, the financial formula takes 43 to 47% of your discretionary money after taxes once you get over about 85,000 and expects it to go for school. The formula does not look at all at expenses. So if you're someone who lives in a pretty expensive house, mortgage-wise, have some big car payments, have a lot of student loans, other debt, you're going to look at that number and you're going to be like, there's absolutely no way in the world I could pay that amount. Or sometimes you've made decisions, like let's say you believe in tithing and you believe in giving 10% of your income to the church. Okay. And you make, 250,000, but there's 25,000 gone right away. No school that I know of, and I've had a chance to talk to many financial aid officers, no school looks at your tithing as something they're going to adjust their formula for. They're going to say that's a personal decision that you chose to make and you didn't have to make it. And it's not our role to justify your lifestyle. And they will put that in as a lifestyle choice.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is if you have your kids in private schools, now the formula can take that into consideration a little bit, the CSS profile formula. That's one of those levers that schools have the ability to include or not include. But I pretty much have not seen a school account for attribute more than $12,000 for that. Like schools either don't count it at all, or they'll count somewhere to $6,000 to $12,000 as legit in that formula. But if you're paying $45,000 or $50,000 or $30,000, then you're going to look at that EFC number and you'll be like, how in the world do they think I can come up with this? And so that's the group that just has to really take a lot of things into consideration. I feel like I've been talking a lot and not listening. Anything else you want to comment?
Oh, I think that's all quite right. And, that EFC figure can be very, very shocking to you, the first time you see it. It's really complicated. The decision about ED or not ED is really complicated because there's so many different complications with finances that have to go in that decision. And then I guess, it's true, right, that if you get an offer from a school that you ED to, but their offer is wildly divergent from what their net price calculator is, and you could either negotiate with them or you're allowed to leave the agreement. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, first of all, schools hate the N word. They hate it because they're like, we're not used car salesmen. But yeah, you could ask for an aid offer to be reevaluated or ask for professional judgment. Certainly you can do that. And you're the one who ultimately decides if it's affordable or not.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not going to throw you in jail if you decide not to. But they're going to be very salty if they award you something similar to what the calculator showed and you bow out. Like it's an expectation that you'll run the calculator. And if the aid award matches the calculator, then you're duty bound. But there's lots of times, especially for people that own businesses, calculators just tend not to be accurate. For people that own businesses, a lot of times they're not accurate for people that own real estate, additional properties. This is the biggest time when I see disconnects between the calculators and reality. people that own businesses and people that own properties. And there's reasons for that. And the reasons are calculators are based off tax returns.
Mm-hmm.
But there's several sources oftentimes of untaxed income that an admission officer will go in and feel like, okay, you know what? Legally, you had a right to take a tax write-off here, but we don't really feel it. You're someone who has additional resources than another person, and we're not necessarily going to give you that deduction. So it really gets subjective here. So, for example, there could be two people that could take a car deduction, or mileage deduction, or two people that could take right off their home as a business expense. And an admission officer could look back in one and they could say, yeah, I think this is legitimate. I can see why you would need to do that. And another person, they could say, you're just, using the tax breaks, but we're going to add that income back in. And so for those reasons, and that happens a lot with property owners that own multiple properties, and happens a lot with business owners. I can think of somebody, I'm not going to mention their name, obviously, but you sat in some sessions with me, Lisa, and the 8 award was $20,000 higher than the calculator. And they ED'd, and they appealed, and they lost because there was quite a few, in this case, gas stations that were owned, and they were, following the laws of the land and taking every tax break. But the school, and this was a very generous school, it's one of these schools that meets full demonstrated need without loans and, for all incomes. And it's one of the more generous schools in the country, huge endowment school. They said no. And sometimes people just don't, a lot of times they don't budge on that. That's the thing, they say to run the calculators, but I feel schools are duty bound to tell people when calculators are not that accurate.
Right.
And
right.
it's mostly when people have businesses and when they own multiple properties, and sometimes in divorce remarriage situations. Now that's a little more because there's another party involved and there's one more person to not necessarily fill everything out exactly right, and there's just more fraught with air. That one's not necessarily an automatic. And sometimes the business isn't either, but a lot of times it is because of certain expenses that you can take for your tax returns that the admission office won't see as legit. So there's a lot. So for all of these things, and I find I need to take my cue from the family. And if it's a family, and listen, and there's another family that will say, listen, okay, yeah, maybe it'll cost us $150,000 more after taxes, but if we figure our kid's going to live from 18 to 78, that's 60 years. We think for that 60 years, the return on the investment will be there to justify that. That's a few $1,000s a year. We think it's worth it. And it's just so I need to take my cues from you,
Right.
partly because you know how deep your pockets are, but also how conservative or not conservative you are with money.
Exactly.
It's not just how deep your pockets are. It can just be your philosophy toward being a saver, or you know what I mean, or So I don't know. I just thought it would be helpful to talk through all of the different scenarios that are involved in this decision. Is there anything you think we didn't hit?
No, I think we got it all. This is a former neighbor of mine, but they ED2'd to like a highly rejective school.
Mhm.
Then there was a big financial change, and this was before decisions were put out. So they contacted said highly rejective school and tried to withdraw because they realized they couldn't pay it now. But I guess the girl was not withdrawn and she was admitted. And then there was like a huge battle. And I don't know how it ever ended up, but
Yeah, you know what? You bring up an interesting point. Different schools don't all have the same philosophy on how much of an ethical breach it is to bow out over money. Like some people are just it's really a smooth process. You just say like, I got this 8 award. We just can't do this. And I thank you. That's really professional. Appreciate you letting us know, and kind of move on. And then other cases, I mean, there have been schools that have been blackballed for a few years because the school is going to let that school know. Remember, when you sign ED, your school counselor has to sign, the parent has to sign, and the student has to sign. And there's times when schools send another school a message like don't have a kid ED, and they renege on us. So, I mean, I don't think people can know that. I don't expect people to know and learn like, well, which ones are the ones I can do? And, you can't, you need to be going into it with the full expectation that you're withdrawing your 8 offers. Now, I will say this. If money is a factor, I tell my students, don't withdraw your 8 offer until you see the financial 8 offer from the school. Because there are schools that will admit you and you don't see the 8 package right away, which is very frustrating. And when that happens, I'm sorry. I tell people, look, part of the obligation on their part is to give you a package that lines up with that calculator. And until you see that, don't pull your offers everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, well, hopefully this was helpful. I just thought people might appreciate a nuanced conversation of when to ED and when not to ED. No value judgments whatsoever here. Every family's different. Everybody's pockets are different. Everybody puts a different emphasis on how important it is for them to go to their number one school versus their other schools, which are perfectly viable options. And so I know as a counselor, like, I'm not heavy-handed here at all. I'm really listening to my families. I'm listening to their financial situation. I'm looking to their outlook on life. I will tell a family, though, if I get a sense that paying this full price is going to really, really stretch them, I will challenge them. If I know that, okay, you're telling me you want to go to med school, and I'm looking at these 2 to 3 other kids here, like, this is your first one, you might want a more holistic view, because in general, I will say this, when funds are not unlimited, I'm kind of a fan of trying to see if you can get your undergrad at a pretty good rate if you know that you're going on for professional degrees.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a fan of that, because it's just a lot of money to pay for these schools for undergrad and then grad school and then maybe, law school or something. And then you're looking at multiple kids. Like, double doctor families struggle with this, coming up with this, right?
I just got really like a little mini panic attack as you were talking about all these different tuition payments a person could have to make. So,
oh, sorry, Lisa.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm not. That's all. I'll just never retire. It's fine.
No, you know this. You very well versed on merit aid strategies. Mm-hmm. That's one thing that you had before I even met you. So you came in knowing how to sort of work that angle, and, so I think you'll be perfectly fine.
I hope so.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to listen to the second half of your Marischal Gentry interview. I've heard the first half, and the second half is up this week.
Fantastic. Well, thank you.
All right, take care, Lisa.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
We are starting a new interview, and it is with Robert Alexander, who's the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid and Enrollment Management at the University of Rochester. It's a 70-minute interview, and it's a 2-parter. Friends, I'm here with Robert Alexander. He's the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at the University of Rochester. Welcome to our podcast, Robert.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark.
Well, we're really thrilled to have you. You're at a really important school, a school I know I recommend a lot. And we have 4 other co-hosts who are all college counselors, all of whom hold your school in really high regard. And we all frequently recommend you. So we're excited. So why don't you start by tell us a little bit about your background. We certainly want to know about any admission roles you've had. Walk us up to what you're doing today. But feel free to take it wherever you want, whatever you think will help us understand the context through which you'll be speaking.
Sure. The journey I've been on is probably similar to others in my position. Growing up, never dreamed that I'd be the dean of enrollment someday, but came from a real working class family, first generation college student myself. And I think all those years of my parents impressing upon me the importance of education resulted in a not so accidental, real love for the collegiate experience. And conveniently, I found a way to never have to leave college. So I attended Tulane University in New Orleans, and began my admission career there. Had some amazing mentorship and some amazing experiences, both as that institution really worked to diversify itself, geographically and racially and ethnically, um, and then went through the crucible that was Hurricane Katrina. The impact of working at really three different institutions, right? Tulane before, during, and after that devastating natural disaster, did a couple of things for me. It solidified that higher education and particularly working in enrollment was my calling. It also showed me how higher education writ large, not just one institution, but across institutions, the level of collaboration that could happen was astounding. And it also reinforced in me that, having just finished an MBA, that I could apply marketing and management principles to this work in a pretty unique way. And that attracted some attention. And eventually, after that institution recovered in its enrollment and was back on a wonderful and slightly different and I think improved trajectory into the future, I moved up and moved out to University of the Pacific in Northern California. Spent a wonderful 5-year period there, building and balancing their enrollment across different programs. Completed my doctorate at the University of Pennsylvania, and that was in higher education leadership. So that was another important component into the mix, and really helped me see more of higher ed outside of just the admissions financial aid registrar kind of lens. And then spent some time at Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi, one of the colleges that changed lives, a fantastic small liberal arts college where I got to wear a lot of hats, play roles, not just in enrollment management, but also in institutional technology and in marketing and communications. And eventually, after 7 years there, this opportunity at Rochester was open and really uniquely attractive to me. The work that happens at a research university is really important, not just for the undergraduate students, not just for the local community, but really for the world at large. The idea of new knowledge and our motto to learn, discover, heal, and create, sort of in balance there, really called to me. I inherited a fantastic team here and a very unique institution amongst the other large research universities.
No, that's great. And what a great breadth of experience. I mean, you're getting the West Coast experience. You're getting something probably the closest that would be the most akin to what you're at Rochester now would be Tulane. But then you're also getting a Gulf Coast experience in Mississippi. So you've been in various parts of the region of the country in various roles. I'm curious how you initially started. So you graduated from Tulane. Was it the traditional tour guide, get active, tour guide leader, senior fellow? Hey, let's hire him and just sort of start out as a
It was not.
Yeah, tell me how you got there. Tell me that part.
I sort of meandered my way into it. As a college student, I had ended up playing some pretty important roles in club sports and with the campus recreation center, and helped them develop not just the programs that they had for students, but also some new opportunities that generated revenue by selling memberships to the community at large, and kind of assisted in a new effort to sort of organize and market what they offered. And my boss there was the one who said, there's an admissions job open. You would be a great fit with that kind of work, given what I've seen of you. So, much thanks to her, and then to the dean of admissions and enrollment management there at the time, who became a wonderful mentor for me. who I think could see the value in bringing in someone who didn't come from the sort of inside, the tour guide, insider, that I brought some other experience from across the university to the role. And he really was someone that if you raised your hand, he was going to give you as much rope as you were willing to take, and see whether you could make some things happen. So as a first year admission counselor, I can remember him asking for a volunteer to work on a new kind of application to college, one that wouldn't be on paper but would live on the World Wide Web. And a year in, I've made myself pretty indispensable by really being the project manager on our first web application.
That's good.
Which was incredibly new at the time, but obviously played a pretty important role as we headed into the 2000s.
No, that's great.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, the recommended resource for episode 249 is a very, very important brand new book. It's called Breaking Ranks. And the subtitle is How the Rankings Industry Rules Higher Education and What to Do About It. Now, the book's by Colin Driver, and he's the president of Reed College. And friends, I vacillated about making this the recommended resource, not because of any ambivalence or disinterest in the book, but simply because I am interviewing Miljan Trulov, the VP of Enrollment at Reed, later this year. And one of the things we're actually going to talk about is this book. But I'd rather you buy it now and or get it from your local library and read it before my interview. But in this book, Breaking Ranks, president of Reed College, Colin Driver, he shows how popular rankings have induced college applicants to focus almost solely on pedigree and prestige, while also tempting educators to sacrifice academic integrity for short-term competitive advantage. Forcing colleges to focus on standardized best college hierarchies, Driver argues rankings have threatened the institutional diversity, the intellectual rigor, and the social mobility, check this out, that is the genius of the American higher education system. As a former university administrator who refused to play the game, Driver leads his readers on an engaging journey through the mysteries of college rankings, admissions, and he asserts that rankings undermine the very moral authority of higher education by encouraging certain distorted behaviors, misrepresentations, and outright cheating by the ranked institutions. He explains what is most useful and important in evaluating colleges. And Driver offers both college applicants, I'd add, and their parents, and educators a guide to pursuing their highest academic goals without being compelled to obsessively and obsequiously chase the best college illusion. Driver reveals how to break ranks with the ranking industry that misleads its consumers, it undermines academic values, and it also perpetuates social inequality. We will now return to part one of my interview with Dr. Robert Alexander, and he's the Dean of Admissions, Financial Aid, and Enrollment Management at the University of Rochester. And we are discussing understanding the University of Rochester. Let's talk about who Rochester is. So you hop in Uber somewhere, and the Uber driver says, University of Rochester. I've never heard of that. What would you say? How would you answer the question, who is the University of Rochester?
Yeah, Rochester is one of the top tier, most prestigious research universities in the country. But we are prestigious without being pretentious. And I think that really translates into a level of accessibility for students. Rochester itself is, was once the Silicon Valley of America and the world, with the Kodak and Xerox legacies here. And that ethos of rolling up your sleeves and working hard is part of who we are. But what really sets us apart from the other top tier research universities is number one, our size. We're on the smallest end. We bring in about 1,500 new first year students every year. And that really enables a lot of that interaction that most places say happens, but it can be really challenging to find in actuality at the larger research institutions. But number two, and perhaps most impactfully for students, this place is so interdisciplinary because of the flexibility of the curriculum. We talk about students at Rochester getting to study what they love, and the flexible curriculum is what really empowers that. At Rochester, there are no required courses. There's one requirement that is a writing requirement that can be filled by a host of different academic courses in all sorts of different academic disciplines. But really, students are given some structure and some scaffolding. I talk about what makes us different from an experience at a Brown, per se, where that is more like giving a student a ball of clay with which they can mold and shape anything that their heart desires. For us, I think it's more like giving a student a set of Lego bricks where you can only fit them together in certain ways, but there are nearly unlimited combinations between how you put the shapes together and which colors and what you end up building. So that availability for students to explore broadly and dive deeply means that every student at Rochester, by the time they graduate, even in the same majors, even who are all on a pre-med track, for example, they've all taken different courses to get there. And that really instills itself in the character of our students. They are not competitive with each other in a cutthroat way. And I think that's because they each know that everybody in that class with them is there for a different reason. So that imparts a level of curiosity. Why are you taking this class, Mark? What do you want to get out of this, particular course experience? Even though we're all going to be learning the same material over the course of the semester, how do you want to apply this or combine it with other dimensions of your academic journey? So that curiosity is a big part of who our students are.
No, that's great. And there's not a lot of schools really with open curriculums. I mean, you have them in the liberal arts and sciences, the Amherst and the Smiths and the Vassars and in Grinnell, some schools like that. But on the university side, Brown, you've mentioned Brown. Who else do you sort of see having a similar model to you?
Yeah, I think we're pretty unique. We overlap with all of the AAU, right? All of that top tier research cohort. But ultimately, between our filter and what we're doing, I think we're really a leader in true holistic admissions review, especially amongst the research university set. We're really trying to filter out not just almost all of our students could come here and do the work and succeed. Almost all of our applicants have good ethical character. When we talk about the use of character, which we really leaned into when we went test optional even before the pandemic, when we're talking about character, we're trying to do another dive that's deeper into what I call academic character. How has a student utilized whatever options they had to make intentional choices about what they've studied in school, maybe out of school through summer opportunities, maybe even just in terms of the books that they're reading for pleasure? How can they represent to us that they understand themselves? And even without knowing what they want to major in, that's not important. But do they understand that given a level of flexibility that is nearly unmatched in higher ed, that they can approach it in a really meaningful interdisciplinary way and utilize and maximize that opportunity for their own growth, and ultimately to do what the University of Rochester's motto is: make the world ever better. We're looking for students who aren't just in this to make themselves better, but ultimately to make real contributions to the world, whether through research and new discoveries, whether through patient care or developing new technology, whether through artistic expression, or making an impact, even on a one-to-one, human-to-human basis. That idea is really central in utilizing a liberal arts approach, regardless of whether they're studying in the arts and humanities, the social sciences, or in STEM fields.
No, that's great. That's great. And I'm thinking of the kind of student that would thrive, at UR. I mean, everybody pretty much wants a good student, a good citizen, and someone that will contribute, right? So that's kind of baseline. You've already articulated a few things. You said you look for students with intellectual curiosity, you look for students with a strong sense of self, and you look for students that want to make a difference and be difference makers in line with your mission and motto. Are there any other things that maybe cues to you that this could be a good fit for us, particularly that might be unique to Rochester, other than we want someone that's had academic rigor, and we want someone whose teachers like them. Anything beyond sort of the basics?
Yeah, I think the all the things that you said are absolutely true. That one of the things I inherited here at Rochester was a big binder of market research on who our students and alumni are, and I distill this huge report down into 2 words: they're cool nerds. And there's something about that student that makes them really nerdy, and that means they're going to be the right fit with a research university. But there's also something that makes them cool, and when you find the overlap, what is it that sits at the intersection of cool and nerdy? That's the sweet spot. And that's ultimately what I think we're trying to assess when we're interviewing a student, when we're reviewing a student's application, is what are they interested in and what makes them interesting? How are they going to use this, incredible rocket ship of this research university to do research as an undergraduate that is going to help them continue a exploration into whatever facet of the academic journey that they love the most, and that they can both have the time to explore broadly, or they can come in if they think they know what they want to study. They can dive deeply because we don't have gen ed requirements that they have to, quote unquote, get out of the way during their first year. So that opportunity to allow a student to get to know who we are before they submit their application materials, before they interview, and then express their unique fit with Rochester. We're not looking for the perfect student. And I talk about not looking even for the best students. What we're looking for is students who know that it's not about being the best, trophy hunting and trying to excel in everything they've ever done. It's about constantly trying to be better. Again, to that idea that is our motto in Latin, meliora, or ever better, that it's a constant pursuit of betterment that you'll never attain. You'll never actually get there, but it's the journey that counts. And particularly that on that journey, you're going to be a better artist, engineer, writer, doctor, attorney. You're going to be better at that thing if you also understand how to do that work from multiple lenses and apply multiple disciplinary perspectives to understand the world and to understand the human condition.
No, that's fantastic. Thanks, Robert. I think you are. The more you talk, the more I think you paint a unique and distinct picture, which is what we always want when anyone comes on here, and it's what everybody's asking, right? Is how are you different than the other
I think
schools?
there's one more dimension too, and that is the diversity of our student body. We are perhaps at the very top 2 or 3 institutions in terms of proportions of international students. So that really changes the character of our campus. And we are really creating global citizens, even for those Rochester students who don't study abroad, because they are going to they're going to experience a diversity of cultural backgrounds, of ideas and ways of understanding the world that is very unique. Incoming cohorts of students typically include nearly a quarter of the students being international, and around the same percentages of underrepresented students and first gen students. So that experience is also pretty unique. Um, the city of Rochester has a deep tradition in that, and certainly, like any metropolitan area, we're still wrestling with this resurgent understanding of the struggle for racial and social justice. But we've got incredible roots with the work of folks like Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass, for whom our international airport is named. And the university really values that diversity and puts our money where our mouth is in terms of really enrolling classes of students that include 20% of students who are Pell eligible. We meet full demonstrated need for all students who are admitted, and that even includes our international students. So that diversity and richness is really something.
Yeah, you can always look at the budget to see priorities, and not a lot of people are allocating money to internationals. I'm really glad you highlighted that, because a question I'm frequently asked: what's a place that's got a large international population and a strong commitment to international students? So, who is not at UR that you'd like to see more of? And you know this, there's not a school in the country that doesn't have some kids that they wish they had more of on their campus. I don't care who you are, So, who would you like to see more of to round out your student body?
Well, sure. I think the easy answer, when you look at the demographics of our country compared with the demographics of any prestigious higher education institution, is African American students. So we've been very successful at building our overall first gen population, our Hispanic Latinx populations, and a diverse set of international students. But one area where I've put a lot of my attention over the last 2 years is right here in the city of Rochester, working with the City of Rochester Public School District to help empower more of the best and brightest to see Rochester as a real destination for them. So that's working, and we've made a lot of headway. But there are many other, particularly urban centers around the country, where deep partnerships with community-based organizations are working for us. But could they work better? Absolutely, and we'd love to see more of those students enroll. And then, more generally, I think we do want every student out there who is high achieving, but again, not looking for a cutthroat and competitive environment, to understand that Rochester has this really unique opportunity for them to customize their academic experience from the outset and really make it their own, including the courses they take, the research that they do, and um, the kinds of intercultural experiences and co-educational opportunities that they also have.
Well, I'll tell you, you got a really good African American student for me a couple of years ago. Shout out to John Moses. And you did a good job with him, because this coming fall, you're getting his brother, Jaron. So, the family wouldn't be sending the second kid if you didn't do a good job with the first. So,
Well, one of the things that I
congratulations.
think is lost in some of the conversations happening right now around legacy admissions is now is the time where we're really starting to see legacy students at the highest levels of quote unquote elite United States educational institutions that are not coming from historically majority backgrounds. And one of the things that I think we're training a lens on is to what degree does legacy admissions propagate the status quo versus to what degree now can we leverage legacy connections as a way to build on the strength of that real first wave of diverse students who enrolled at the most selective institutions in the country.
Yeah, Robert, I know at most universities, either your department, division, or major play a kind of role, somewhat in the admission process. What about with you? Because you're open, but yet at the same time, there's certain number of faculty members in different departments and things like that, and obviously a lot of schools are oftentimes looking at your curriculum in light of what field of study you might be interested in pursuing, but they also know that people change their minds all the time. So what role does self-described major or department play in the selection process?
That is a great question, and it's part of my answer is that admissions and enrollment management is not just a science; it's also an art.
Mm-hmm.
So we do not admit students to a particular program. All students are admitted to the College of Arts and Sciences, other than our University of Rochester Eastman School of Music students who are really pursuing a conservatory-based program there and go through a very different set of auditions associated with their applications. So separate out the Eastman students. For all the rest, they really do have that freedom and flexibility. So we're keeping an eye on it, but as we shape the class, we don't have differential admission standards. We don't see a big disparity in students' academic performance, depending on which major that they're going into. Now, at the same time, I also will counsel students, parents, school counselors when they're talking about a student's curricular choices in high school. That for Rochester, we will, I think for every school, they'll pay more attention to the grades and the level of rigor in those courses that a student says, yeah, this is really my passion, right? So does every student need to take AP Calculus? No. But if a student is saying, I really love math and AP Calculus was open and available to them at their school, well, that we might want to see that for that student, or at least hear why not. And the same for an AP art history class for someone who's telling us that their passion is art history. So we're vocal in giving that advice that students don't need to challenge themselves and excel in every single area. But if they're telling us about a predilection or passion in some particular area, we'd like to see then how they really leaned into that love and that passion, challenge themselves, and push themselves to excel.
Sounds good. Every school has powerhouse programs, majors. They have them, certainly every selective school, by reputation. And then they also have ones that are maybe not as prominent, but people on the inside know this is incredible faculty or curriculum or experiential opportunities, whatever that we are providing in this particular major, even that we're not known for that. What would you say are the majors that are most prominent reputationally wise? I have a sense of that, but I'm sure, you'll fill me on some that I'm not aware of. And then some that should probably be, but they're not. Maybe they will be 10 years from now, but they're not now, but they should be because maybe they're every bit as good as the ones that are most prominent in the minds of college counselors or students that know you.
Well, we certainly see a lot of students enter Rochester with a real STEM and or pre-health kind of focus. But I'll tell you that even for those students, if they remain on that track, they are also still pulling in some opportunity to take courses in business, in the arts. We've just opened not only spectacular engineering and facilities, including wonderful space for virtual and augmented reality, But we also opened a brand new theater on campus, and it is student space, kind of that black box. The Sloan Center for Performing Arts is a wonderful complement, and we see tons of students who may not necessarily major in our theater arts program, but add that as a really crucial component to what they're doing in another field. We also see that a lot of students coming out of high school don't even know what, for example, optics is. But along their journey at Rochester are exposed to what really is the top optics program in the world, where we've churned out Nobel Prize winners and have one of the world's most powerful lasers, and they fall in love with optics after perhaps beginning on a path that was generally science-based or
Sure.
Physics major. But when you're in a place with the legacy of using light and lenses, with our affiliation with Kodak, Xerox, Bausch and Lomb, in the city and the university's lineage, it's no accident that we still have some of the preeminent programs in that space. I'd also say that business is an incredible strength, whether a student enters thinking from the outset that they want to major in and have a career in business, or whether it's something that they begin as, let me take a business course because that will be useful no matter what field I end up going into. If a student is thinking about entrepreneurship, when they're going to be an inventor of new engineering technologies, for example. And often that will lead to a business minor, a business double major, or a hard pivot. For some of those students who entered thinking pre-med and realized that, after spending some time over at the University of Rochester Medical Center, that a clinical medicine pathway is not in the cards for them. There are amazing careers that student can have in the business of healthcare. And we can open that up. There's so much more happening now than just your traditional finance track, which we do very well. And we've got, the trading floor and terminals and that opportunity for students to be part of a student investment club. But we also have the opportunities to use that lens of business or economics combined with data science, or with the arts and humanities on the marketing side, to put themselves on a pretty unique trajectory in the business world after graduating with a bachelor's degree. Never mind coming back to the Simon School for an MBA.
No, and I think one of the things you really bring out is Rochester's balance, because, when I think of Rochester, the first thing I think of is you being a powerhouse in the healthcare related fields. And of course, your music, and I know your business is exceptional. You're pointing out some of and engineering too, but you're pointing out some of the other things, and I'm really getting a portrait of a really balanced institution that's strong also in humanities and I'm sure social sciences.
Because of our size, faculty really do work together and collaborate on research across what are often siloed disciplines at other places. So you'll find, humanities folks leveraging our strength in technology to, use lasers to be able to uncover the text inside books that would disintegrate if you actually opened and tried to flip through the pages. You'll find our brain and cognitive sciences folks really bridging that gap between linguistics and neuroscience. Folks using the incredible strength of our biomedical engineering program and combining that with a more traditional life sciences biology to help find real solutions to health challenges. And then the collaborations with the medical center, which is a juggernaut. The University of Rochester, because of the medical center and all of the clinics that we have throughout the state of New York, we're the fourth or fifth largest private employer in the state of New York, right? You can think about some pretty household name private companies headquartered in the state of New York. So that often shocks people, but it's a huge healthcare enterprise, and we've got all sorts of non-pre-med students leveraging the strength of the medical center for incredible research opportunities that aren't necessarily leading them toward an MD, but are leading them toward a wonderful and fulfilling career in a healthcare adjacent field.
I should know this, but I don't. You're overlap school, so I would think Cornell. I'm sure there'd be a decent amount of overlap there. I would think when you step outside of the region, some of the schools that are in your athletic league, I could see some overlap with schools like Hopkins, WashU, Emory, probably some of the Boston schools. Talk to me about that. Who am I missing? Who are your overlaps? Are they consistent year after year? And
they do tend to be pretty consistent. We certainly see Brown pop up because of both the academic prestige and the curricular flexibility.
Sure.
But we also see just the big AAU powerhouses, Michigan, Berkeley, UCLA. Those places are obviously a very different kind of experience. But when you're talking about a student from the West Coast, California is our fastest growing state, and now right up there with most of the northeastern states. So of course those students are also applying to Berkeley. Same for students who know they want a strong undergraduate research experience. Of course, Michigan is on their list. So we see a lot of those places. In the Northeast, you'll see Northeastern, Cornell, NYU, BC, BU, Pitt, Tufts, all the rest of the Ivies, and I think that gets us pretty close to the students, the top institutions on our overlap list.
Friends, this completes the first half. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part. On Monday's episode, I'll have some more announcements for you, and then Susan and I will have a brand new interview. It's a 3-part, in-depth interview that went 90 minutes, but we're going to break it into 3 30-minute segments, and it's with Tom Becker, Associate Director of University of Pittsburgh. Friends, there's a lot of noise out there. It's at the cocktail parties. It's at the water cooler. But please always remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel, and to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.